To you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartfelt thanks of a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform. Because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task, we now look to you for leadership and example in further exalting our country in peace.
We're at Vierling Blum's home. We're filming for the Behringer Crawford Museum and the Library of Congress his experiences in World War II. What is your date of birth?
November the 26th, 1921.
And present are the interviewer Tom Fricke, and camera is done by Ken Skelton. You can go ahead with your questions.
Okay. Where were you when the war started, Mr. Blum? I was living in Mount Healthy, Ohio. I was working at WWII Aeronautical. Okay. And how old were you? Oh, let's see. I was 20. 19, actually. 1941, 1940. No, I was 20 years old in 1941. In working in factory work? Yes. Okay. Where were you on December 7th? December the 7th, we were three other friends of mine. We were over on Winton Road at this man's farm. We were out shooting 22 rifles out in the back in his pasture. And we came in to listen to the football game, turned the radio on, and heard about Pearl Harbor. And the next day, my one friend enlisted in the Marine Corps. And one of the other friends enlisted in the Air Force, and the other two, we waited until we were drafted. What feelings when you heard on the radio that day? What went through your mind? We were out to get them. We really, it stirred us up no end. Of course, everybody expected war sooner or later, but the way we were attacked really shook everybody up. So how long, when did you get inducted? I was drafted in 1943. I was on deferment due to the fact that I was working in a defense plant. I was a lead setup man on internal grinders for aircraft. And I had another deferment coming up, but all my friends were gone, so I turned it in. So I was drafted in 1943. So you pretty much volunteered for the draft? You could say that, yeah, yes. What was life like during those first couple years from 41 to 43 here on the home front? Well, we had gasoline rationing, and you couldn't do any traveling much. We carpooled to get over to WWII Aeronautical, and we got 4 gallons of gas a week. So we coasted down a lot of hills to get to work, and used to just turn your motor off and let her fly. And we did, a friend of mine that worked over at the WWII Aeronautical, we were working night shift, and we wanted to have a little time off, and we were going to get 2 days off over 4th of July. So we had saved up our gas coupons between us. We had enough gas, we figured we could make it to Niagara Falls. So we picked up a young man that he didn't work at Wright's, but we wanted somebody to help us on the driving. So we drove up to Niagara Falls and back. It was a very interesting trip. And we made it in 3 days, up and back. Was there any fear in those couple years here of the war coming here, or was it pretty much? To answer that, yes, I guess a lot of people were afraid. I never expected it to happen because after Pearl Harbor, they dropped a couple shells from the submarine into California, but that was all, and I couldn't see any danger here. Brothers and sisters, do you have? I have no brothers or sisters. So you were an only child? Only child. What was your parents' feelings
when you were drafted, or, well, drafted when you
Was
went in?
drafted. They didn't want me to go.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. They were pretty upset about me going.
Supportive, though?
Oh, yes.
Once you,
Oh,
once you went.
definitely, yes.
Where was your training at? Where'd you go for
Well,
boot camp?
when I was first drafted, I was sent to be combat engineers down in Mississippi, Camp Shelby. And while I was at Camp Shelby, I took a test for the Air Force, and I scored very high, and I figured, hey, I'm going to have this made, I'm going to be transferred to the Air Force. But when I took my physical, they found out I was colorblind. So I went from the Air Force, I applied for ASTP, which was Army Specialized Training, was accepted there, and was sent to Georgetown University, Washington, D.C.
For what?
Training for an engineer, as
Okay,
engineers.
wow. How long were you in Georgetown?
Didn't last too long, unfortunately. I guess we got there, I would say 6 months, and the ASTP program was closed due to the fact that there were so many casualties overseas that they closed the program, and just about everybody that was in the ASTP was transferred either to tank battalion, infantry, or infantry divisions. I went out with the infantry division.
What division? This was Army?
This was Army, 102nd Infantry Division.
Okay. And your rank at the, well, you started out as private?
Private, PFC mostly. I wound up as a T5, Technician 5. I was supposedly a expert in demolition, and mines and stuff like that.
When in 1943 did you, what month, do you remember?
February of 1943 is when I was drafted.
So this was pretty much, the war was just really getting going, or at least for the
Yes,
American part. It was
yes.
just. You spent how, you went to Georgetown and then from there?
From Georgetown, when they folded up the ASTP program, we were transferred. I was transferred to Camp Swift, Texas, 102nd Infantry Division.
And training for?
Training to go overseas.
Okay. And when did you go overseas?
We went overseas. We got on a boat in September of 1944.
Oh, okay.
I was on a victory ship, Sea Tiger.
To England?
No, we landed at Cherbourg.
Okay, yeah. That would have been after the
That was after D-Day.
D-Day, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you went right to.
D-Day was in June. We landed.
How was
in
your
September.
trip over on the victory boat?
Wasn't too bad. I wasn't seasick or anything going over, and I had pretty much of a break because I knew some people, and I got assigned to one of the guns on anti-submarine guns on the deck. So I was on the gun crew. So I got to spend a lot of time up on deck going over.
How was the anxiety over the submarine attack?
Well, there was a couple times when the destroyers were going around dropping depth charges, but as far as seeing any torpedoes, never saw any.
Never saw any going over. How long did it take?
It was about almost 2 weeks going over.
What you were? You said you were demolition? Was this part of your? What you went over as to do demolition or?
Well, no. I was in headquarters company in what they call the A&P platoon. The A&P platoon in the headquarters company and the infantry in those days, we supplied the ammunition to the rifle companies, and also we did demolition work and cleared minefields.
Okay. So you got to Cherbourg.
Cherbourg, and then we went to...
That's September, October of 44?
In September, we arrived at Cherbourg, and my company specifically wound up in St. Muir, Glees.
Okay.
And we stayed there. Our division was, after we arrived in France, the front lines were so far away, they were having trouble getting the supplies up. So many of the people from our division were assigned to trucking outfits and what they called the Red Ball Express, and they were hauling ammunition up to the front, which was pretty rough on those guys because they were driving like 12, 15, 16 hours a day. I was not one of the drivers at that time. Our platoon stayed in camp, and we were being trained on how to handle minefields and various mines we were going to run into, and how to combat the effects of those minefields.
How long was that training?
Oh, it wasn't very long, because we landed in September. We went into combat in fourth week in October.
Wow. So October 44, you went to where?
We trucked up to Germany. This was the Siegfried Line, and actually we were very close to Aachen, Holland. We were in a little town called, honey, hand me that little paper there and I'll tell them what the town was.
That's fine.
I can't think of it right offhand, where we went into combat. We landed, we went on to combat in Herzogenrath, Germany.
What part of Germany?
That was right on the border of Holland.
Northwest.
Well, that's the western, the
Yeah,
west.
yeah,
It was the
okay.
Siegfried Line.
Yeah.
And we relieved the 30th Infantry Division, and it was a holding operation right at that time, and the idea was we were supposed to get used to being in combat.
Okay.
So you got a little training before we actually went into the combat.
What was an average day like? Well, I guess there was no average day.
There was no average day. Well, as not being a rifleman, was very fortunate, because I was not out in the foxhole all the time. Usually, our platoon was lucky enough we'd be able to find some place in a building at night. However, when the big attack started to crack the Siegfried Line, and our battalion itself suffered 67% casualties in this first day, and at that time, our platoon, along with every other platoon in his headquarters company, went online, because we didn't have anything left to stop the Germans in case they counterattacked. If I remember rightly, in our companies, the 3 companies in our battalion went from 188 men down to something like 12 or 14 men was all that was left in those 3 companies. We all went online that night. And then after a little while, we were pulled back for a couple days, until we got reinforcements, replacements to take care of the guys we'd lost.
What was your job?
My job was primarily, we would travel back, we had a truck, we'd go back, pick up ammunition, bring it up, deliver it to the rifle companies that are out in the foxholes. We also, during the attack, any time of an attack or any time there was patrols run or anything, we'd go out at night searching for mines, trying to clear a line through the minefields, so when the attack came, we knew how to get through the lines. When we were in the attack on the Siegfried Line, our responsibility, if possible, was to try to crack into dugouts that the Germans had, their fortifications, and which was done by, the idea was sometimes you could get up on the top of these things and drop a hand grenade down their vent holes, but then they found out about that and they blocked it so the hand grenades wouldn't go down. You'd bring up 10 pounds of TNT and a satchel charge, get around behind a pillbox, stack the thing up against the door, get back and set it off, try to blast your way into the pillboxes to get the Germans that were inside firing at you.
I guess then the troops moved on from there. I mean, as you just kept
We just
breaking through, and
we broke through, yeah. Once we got through the Siegfried Line, we stopped. We got to the Linnick at the Ruhr River, and the attack was stopped then, and we went into holding action for the rest of the winter, due to the fact that the bulge started in December, which was south of us, and everything was pulled out of our territory, and we were in a holding action trying to stop in case there was a counterattack in our area. So there was no not a lot of fighting from December to February of 44 and 45.
So you're kind of backup for the bulge or the...
Yeah, well, most of our tank equip outfits were pulled out and sent south to help at the bulge, which left our division, we were holding a 15-mile front, which ordinarily a division would maybe hold a 3-mile front.
Can we talk a little bit about life during the time when you were on the Siegfried line and
Okay.
where you were living? You said like in...
Well, especially after the holding accident, we were, our platoon was in a house. We had a house, and stayed mostly in the basements because we had a little thing we called Bed Check Charlie. Every night the Germans sent a little airplane, which we similar to our Piper Cub, and they would drop hand grenade bombs on us at night. So we always were in the basements. Life was very tough, let me tell you. The primary problem was the cold and the fact that we didn't have, we had no camouflage. We were, anytime we could get a hold of any white bandages or any sheets we could find or anything like that to camouflage ourselves because there was a lot of snow in the winter. The bitter, I guess I could say, the bitter thing for me was we would go back to pick up ammunition and bring it up. And you go back for ammunition, and remember, we were on line. You know, showers, you don't shave every day, we're dirty, we stink. We weren't too welcome in a Red Cross, and you had to pay for your coffee and your donuts. But the bitter thing was when you would go back and you would see the quartermaster outfits that were behind the lines. These guys were all walking around with beautiful combat boots, weatherproof. They don't have to worry. Our guys are getting trench foot up there because our feet are wet all the time. Everybody had 2 pairs of socks. What you did, you hung 1 pair of socks on your underwear next to your skin to dry. The other pair was on your feet. You were wet all the time. We were very fortunate. At night we could take guys in the foxholes. They couldn't take their boots off. Their feet were constantly wet, 24 hours a day, and everybody got trench foot. I was very fortunate. I just had a slight case of trench foot, but I hauled many a truckload of boys that we carried out of a front line that couldn't stand up from trench foot, and they were carried and taken back to evac hospitals and tried to help on their trench foot. A lot of boys lost their feet from trench foot. It was no fun up there.
So that was a major problem.
Major problem during that time was not the casualties from combat, casualties from trench foot.
Interesting. So when you were living, what was cooking arrangements, things like that, when you were living with your platoon? And I mean, did you?
Well, most of the time we were on K rations. When in the holding action during the winter, our kitchen was pretty close to us. We would sometimes get warm meals. When you were on K rations, when you were up in the front line, actually in the foxholes, you had K rations. And the theory was that K rations were in a box that you could burn the heat sometimes. The trouble was you had to be careful because you could do too much heating because the Germans would see what you were doing and open fire on you.
What kind of camaraderie did you have with your fellow soldiers?
Very good, very good.
How did you spend your time? I mean, your leisure time, if there was recreation, anything that...
Our platoon, we had a little thing going on. Even while we were in combat, even when we were advancing in the attack and things like that, we had a chess tournament running.
Okay.
A lot of the guys in our platoon came from ASTP, which was Army Specialized Training, so we were coming out of college. And one of the guys in our platoon was a chess player, and he loved to play chess, and he taught, I guess 9 or 10 of us how to play chess. So we were running a chess tournament all the while we were in combat. We carried a little chess set, it was about 4.5 inches square, had a lid on it, little bitty tiny chessmen. And we were even running this contest when we were in combat, when we were advancing. And let me tell you, whoever had the chess set, he got a lot of protection. Because he was kept, he was carrying out, we didn't want to lose our chess set, so he wasn't in any deals where we're going to be out in any danger. Going to keep him in, so the idea was be carrying a chess set when you're in the attack.
What about communication, letters from home during this time?
Got plenty of letters from home. We had what they called it, the email, which of course all your letters were censored, but we had no problem. Even in combat, but let me tell you, when the company clerk came up and said mail call, everybody was taking chances going down the road trying to get to where the mail call was.
Yeah. So you stayed at that point, you said, until after December, January?
From about the middle of December through February.
Okay.
We were not in any attack. We were in a holding position. And we were running patrols at night, some patrols during the day sometimes. And most of the firing was artillery duels, firing at each other.
So where'd you move in February?
In February, the attack was started to go to the Rhine River.
And you just marched towards the Rhine, I guess?
Yeah, we jumped the Ruhr River. I think it was February the 23rd. I think it was the 23rd. Our battalion was not in the attack. We were in the backing up. We were reserve. Our other two regiments of our division were in the attack. So I remember we started out like I think it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was carrying their combat packs, their weapons and everything, and every man had to carry something extra because there were going to be no supplies going across the Ruhr River. So I remember I was carrying 2 cans of machine gun bullets, and other people were carrying ammunition. Whatever we thought they would need, everybody was carrying because we were in reserve. We crossed the Ruhr River. When the artillery opened up, I think it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, the sky lit up like it was daylight. And the shells were just going overhead, something awful, as we were approaching a bridge.
The American shells, or were you being shelled?
Yeah,
Our
artillery was
our
firing.
artillery.
By that time, our combat engineers had laid a bridge across the Ruhr River, and incidentally, that bridge was knocked out, I think, at least 3 times the first few hours from German artillery. But by the time we got up there, it was about I think 9 or 10 o'clock when our platoon got to the bridge. We got across okay, and once we got across, they set up a supply area where all the stuff, extra stuff we were carrying was there, so we could distribute it to the rifle companies. About that time, the other 2 regiments were getting hit pretty hard. Then our battalion went into combat and were called up to attack. And by that time it was getting late in the afternoon, and I remember darkness was falling, and we got in a firefight. Bullets flying all over the place, and finally somebody got smart and said, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. You could always tell the German bullets from the American because you could tell the difference from the guns.
Yeah.
And, wait a minute, somebody yelled, and we found out we were fighting one of our other companies. So we finally stopped that. We got into a little town called, can't think of the name of that little town right now, but the Germans counterattacked once night fell, and a couple of Tiger tanks got into the area. Tiger tanks were, everybody was scared when Tiger tanks were in the area. And I remember that our forward observers, which are artillery forward observers, called in fire on the edge of this town to try to stop this counterattack. So our own guns were firing right where we were. But the counterattack was stopped that night, and from then on in, big breakthrough after the Ruhr River, and we went onto the Rhine.
How fearful is combat?
Well, I've seen people that said they were not scared, but I want to say this. Anybody that says they weren't scared is either an idiot or there's something wrong with that guy. Everybody was scared. I don't care who you were scared.
How are you affected by the casualties?
You got to where you expected it. You expected these casualties. You hoped it never happened, and you certainly hoped it never happened to you. But casualties became I guess you would say, a way of life, really.
How fast were you moving at this point? I mean, how many miles a day would you?
Oh, well, once we broke through after the Ruhr River, we're on our way to the Rhine River. The tankers were way ahead of us, and what we were doing was going from small town to small town. And once you got to the small town, the idea was get out and clear out the enemy. I remember they brought trucks up from quartermaster drivers to haul us, so we didn't have to walk, which was a nice break for the infantry. Gee, we're going to get to ride.
Yeah.
You come into town, at the edge of the town, stop, everybody out, and sweep through the town, looking for snipers or what have you. I remember it was funny. We hit this one little town, and we started getting out of a truck, and we went under fire. Somebody's shooting at us. And our truck driver was scared to death. He turned that truck around and took off. And two of us jumped in the Jeep, well, not me. Two other guys jumped in the Jeep and took off after him. And they caught him and brought him back up with a guy sitting in the cab with a gun on his head. Told him, hey, you're going to stay with us. We'll take care of you. But if you try to get away once more time, we're going to shoot you. That was it. He stayed with us after that.
So you get to a town and you'd have to
Sweep through.
sweep
yeah.
through the town.
Yeah.
Was there usually combat then, or?
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we would pass, if the tankers were going so fast, they weren't cleaning up. And there would be maybe a small infantry detachment of the Germans that's still there, ready to fight a little bit. What you did was you go through the town, and if there was any, you had to go in every house and clear that house. And you got to the point where, hey, it's not worth taking a chance. You had to go down the basement to see if anybody was down in there. Throw a hand grenade down first, and then go down. You don't want to go down in case there's a German down there waiting to shoot you. You throw a hand grenade down in there, you're probably clearing them out. So you learned as you went along how to do these things.
Civilians in the town?
By then, yes. When we first went through the Siegfried Line, the towns were all deserted. But once we got across the Ruhr River, then we were having the German population to worry about, yeah.
How were they? How did they respond to you, and how did you all respond to them?
A lot of nixed Nazis.
Yeah.
A lot of nixed Nazis. Didn't have too much trouble with the German population. Most of them by that time were ready for the war to end.
Yeah.
Really.
We're in what month now, would you say?
This was March.
March? Okay. Weather
Yeah.
changing?
Yeah, it was getting spring, and I can tell you one interesting little story that happened to me and two other guys. We were at the Rhine River, and we found a little boat, and there was a lake there. So us three Weisenheimers, we got an idea. We'll go out in this rowboat, drop a couple hand grenades in the water, kill the fish, and we'll have fish for dinner. Not a very good idea. We never thought about the Germans are on the other side of the Rhine River and they can see us. So we're out there in a boat. The next thing you know, we're hit with artillery coming in, and you can't hear it come in when they set the things to go off while they're still up in the air, and you can't hear the shells coming in. So we're in here, and here's the shells coming in and blowing up over our heads, and all the shrapnel's coming down. Three guys out of the boat, into the water, boots, everything was getting wet, and we had to swim to shore.
Had to be cold.
It was cold,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, we sure learned our lesson. Didn't get any fish either, unfortunately.
So you're moving, where was your next move to from?
Well, from the Rhine, then the next was to go to the Elbe River. Same situation, we were fighting our way to the Elbe River. When we got to the Elbe, the idea, we were ordered to stop at the Elbe River because the Russians were coming, and they were going to get that territory. And so we stopped at the Elbe River until the Russians came in and conquered the Germans. And
Okay. So now we're talking April, May, I guess.
this was, yeah, the war ended in June.
May
What
8th.
was the
May 8th.
May the 8th, yeah. So
Yeah.
this was March and April. And we got to the Elbe River. We holed up there, dug in. You could sit there, look across and see the Germans in foxholes across the river, but we were not going to attack them.
Victory then?
That was victory, yes.
What was your feelings?
Hey, this is great. Yes, it was great. Everybody was happy, but we still had a lot of problems. After the war was over, then we became occupational troops. Our division, I was still with 102nd then, and our division was in occupation duty, which meant that well, the Germans, some of the die-hard Germans were calling themselves werewolves. They were going to continue the war, and after the surrender and everything. So we had to put up with the werewolves for about a week. But after about a week, the werewolves were conquered. Like one bullet, and they were wiped out. That was all there was to it. And so at the end of the war, then our division started training to go to the Pacific, and we were scheduled to go to the Pacific, so thank the Lord, the war ended before we were sent over.
Okay, so you, at the Elbe, how long did you stay at the Elbe?
I was very close to the end of the war.
Yeah. And then you left shortly after?
I'm kind of hazy as to what all happened after the surrender. I can't. We pulled back and went down to close to Bavaria in Germany as occupational troops.
Okay.
And of course, then there's no more foxholes or anything like that. Everybody's living in.
Living high on the hog then?
Yeah, we were living high on the hog.
So, how long did you stay in Germany?
Well, I transferred out of the hundreds. After the war was over, and then after the war ended in the Pacific, so it was time to start thinking about the soldiers getting discharged and coming home. They set up a point system, and if you had battle stars, it was worth so many points. It was so many points for every month you were overseas. It was so many points if you were in combat, length of service. I was about in the middle, I think. I can't remember. Well, they started out with, if guys that had landed some of us guys had over 100 points. They were the first ones to be discharged. I was around in the middle, so what they were doing, you were transferring and getting transferred closer and closer to coming home. I left 102nd. I went to a quartermaster outfit in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. And it was a quartermaster trucking outfit, and I was hauling a lot of gasoline and things like that all around the area, supplying the troops around the area. And then from there I was transferred into another quartermaster outfit in Frankfurt, Germany. I was in, actually I was working in a store like that was selling goods to WWII and officers. And I was getting closer to coming home before the next outfit I transferred into was the Eisenhower Honor Band, which was really a good deal. I finally got into what I loved was music, and I got to transfer into the Eisenhower Honor Band in Frankfurt, Germany. And the funny thing was, I only got to play with the band 2 or 3 times because they had a symphony at that time, and the symphony was traveling all over Germany, putting on concerts for the troops and for the German population and things like that. And what they did, guys that were in the band that had seen combat, we were kind of the guards for the symphony. We made sure nothing happened to these guys. These guys were really good musicians. Most of them had jobs to come home to in the symphonies around the United States, and that's all they were looking for. So they needed a lot of protection.
Did you play in the band?
I played in the band.
What
yes.
instrument?
Well, I'm primarily a trumpet player, but I was playing baritone in the Eisenhower Honor Band.
Okay. What month was that?
Oh, boy.
Roughly,
It must have been January, December,
Wow.
January, 45, 46.
46. So
And
you were in Germany for how many months after the war was
After
over?
war was over, the war ended in May. I came home in February
Okay.
the next year.
So what you just described is pretty much what you did for those 8 months?
That was it.
Yeah, okay.
Having it, actually, it was not a bad deal at all.
Yeah.
And I had a furlough to go to Switzerland, but my number came up to go home. I turned the furlough in and came home.
Yeah, I guess.
Never got to see Switzerland.
So February 46 you came home?
Yeah.
Okay. To Cincinnati, Mount Healthy?
Cincinnati, yeah, Mount
Okay.
Healthy.
And when you got back, what did you do?
Well, let's see, what did I do when I came back? I was going to take it easy for a while and maybe go back to school, but my dad came home one night. I'd only been home a little while. My dad came home and he said, would you be interested in going to work? I said, no, I'm not interested in going to work. But way back before the war, I'd worked in a tailor shop, and I'd been in a union, Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. And my dad comes home and tells me, would you be interested in going to work at a place called Goldsmiths? I don't know, who the heck is that? They made tennis rackets and golf equipment. It was a sporting outfit, and they were going to become unionized, and they wanted the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America to get in there, and my dad says, would you go to work there and help the Amalgamated Clothing Workers get into there to represent McGregor Goldsmith? I said, I don't want to go to work. But I did go to work. Yeah. So, and I worked there for about 5 or 6 months, I guess it was. And I went back in the machine shop.
How old were you then when you got out of the war?
Oh, 20, 25.
You were discharged coming out of Germany,
Yeah.
right? You were that was your discharge?
Discharged here in Atterbury, Indiana.
Okay. But as soon as you came back, you
Yeah, we
received
were
a discharge
discharged,
and
yeah.
came on home. How did things change from when before you went to the war and before the experiences you had coming home?
It was great. It was great. You just kind of took up where you'd left off, really. And it was just great to be home.
Sure. One of the questions I always ask is, having had that experience, what are your feelings on war?
Well, I guess I need to say this. Let's talk about present day. We shouldn't be in Iraq, but we are in Iraq, and if we pull out of Iraq, it'll be the biggest mistake we ever made. Somehow, we've got to win this thing. We should have found that out when they were in Vietnam. We have got to quit backing down. We have got to stay in there. There's times when you can't back down. There's times when you need it. I am in favor of a strong military.
Do you keep contact with any of your buddies in the...
Yeah. We, my wife and I don't go to any more of our reunions. We haven't for the last couple of years, but we used to go to the 102nd reunions. I still email to a couple of riflemen that I know, and as far as most of the men that were, I've lost touch with everybody from my old platoon. Most of them are dead, and some of them we have never found. I, for a while, was supposedly coordinator of our company, but I haven't found any new guys in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's the point now where this may be our last reunion this year for our division. It gets smaller every year.
Ken, do you have any questions? Or
I wanted to ask about the clearing the mines. How
Okay.
hard and scary was that to do that? How'd you go about it?
Very. We had, I'm glad you asked that question. We had what they're called the shoe mine, which was a little wooden box. It was approximately 2.5 inches wide by 4 inches long. It had about a quarter of a pound of TNT in that. The only metal in the box was 2 little brads to hold the hinge. And it didn't take very much pressure at all to set a shoe mine off. You could not detect these anyway. It's impossible to detect unless you were going in the ground with your bayonet and stabbing in the ground, and you had to be so careful because the slightest little pressure on a shoe mine would set it off. They were very difficult. And what we would do, if we thought there was a minefield and if the attack had already went by, rather than risk your life trying to find, or risk your foot trying to find these shoe mines, you would take heavy chains and drag them across the ground and try to set off all the shoe mines. The Germans also had another little gadget that we really loved. It was called a bouncing Betsy, we called it. This had 2 charges in it. If you stepped on it, the first charge went off and pushed the mine up into the air, which got you about belt high, and then the second charge would go off and tear your insides out. The infantry did not like the bouncing Betsies. Very dangerous weapon. We lost a lot of people with bouncing Betsies. Between your shoe mines and the bouncing Betsies, they really gave us a headache. Booby traps, I know they've got stuff today that is unbelievable, but back then the Germans were pretty good at booby traps too. And it was hard. You had to visualize, I guess, the ordinary infantryman going to town, he's looking for loot. And he forgets all about these booby traps. You never saw any guy in our platoon going into town and grabbing things like that. You had to be careful. You had to watch everything for booby traps. Look out, look out. Germans were very clever. They knew American soldiers were picking up loot. They booby trap those things. We lost a lot of guys by grabbing stuff without checking for booby traps. Other mines, big anti-tank mines, of course, walking on those are not going to set them off. It's going to take a lot of weight to set a mine like that off. So we didn't have to worry too much about those unless we had tankers that were going through with our tanks. You had to clear those out of there. We did have a trouble. New Year's Eve, 1944, New Year's Eve. We were laying a minefield that night, and we were laying British mines. We had never seen these British mines before. They're a little bit different than the American mines. And we had, by that time, we had a lot of guys coming up replacing people that had gotten injured and hurt. And we had a young man in our platoon. We didn't even know this boy's name. He'd only been there a couple days. And we went out to lay these mines, and the mines, when you lay any tank mines, there is a band that fits around the detonator, and you have to pull that band out of there to arm the mine. And he was trying to pull this out of this detonator, and it wouldn't come out. And he jerked it too hard or something, and the daggone thing went out and blew him apart. And several, two or three other men were injured from shrapnel. I carried one guy in on my back. And that's interesting because something that, when it goes off like that, the Germans will always fire a flare gun. If you hear a flare gun go off, if you don't have time to hit the ground, you better freeze right where you're at. We got caught standing up. And as long as you don't get panicky and stand absolutely still, don't move a muscle, they might think you're a tree and they're not going to shoot you. But if you move and they see you, so when a flare goes up, you have to stand still. Anyway, of course, they fired flares as soon as they heard that mine go off. And I carried this one guy in on my back, and when we got back in, our sergeant completely lost it that night. He just sitting in the corner crying. Somebody had to go back and find out what this boy's name was. So I finally volunteered to go back out and get his dog tags, find out what his name was. But the poor guy, we didn't even know him. He was dead, no doubt about it. Just tore him in half. That's the only time we ever had any trouble laying a minefield.
Didn't we lose thousands of casualties at the Siegfried Line because we didn't have air support and our infantry was going through the minefields and there were Panzer tanks, I think, firing on them, and the artillery and all. And I think that battle was overshadowed by the Battle of the Bulge, so a lot of people don't really hear about the Siegfried Line battle.
Well, the Siegfried Line actually went all the way down southern Germany. It was a long defensive line. The area where we busted through was just a small part of the Siegfried Line. I think that there was a lot of casualties. That the Bulge actually the Bulge was an entirely different type of outfit. At that time, the weather was bad. There was no aircraft in the air at all, and the Germans just ran right over the top of this. And I think the problem was a lot of green troops there. I think there's, I don't know. I'm not going to make any comments about the Bulge. At the Bulge, while the Bulge was going on in our area, the orders were no retreat. And our platoon, all AFP platoons, we were out. We mined, we put dynamite on every tree. The Germans had a lot of roads where they had trees alongside the road. We mined we put dynamite on every tree in such a way that it would, if we were decided to set those off, we'd drop the trees right across the road so that the Germans wouldn't have a hard time getting through. Actually, at that time, we only had a few tanks. Most of the tanks were going sent down to the other area. They were running tanks all night long trying to fool the Germans into thinking we had a lot of power there when we really didn't. But the orders were no retreat, stay and die. And the German never really counterattacked that much in our area. I could say one other thing. The British were on our left flanks all the time, and they do a lot of things different than what we would do. American troops like to go out at night and shoot them up a little bit. And Germans like to keep us awake, we like to keep the Germans awake. But the British, they did different. And they had these daggone searchlights, and they would lower them down and light up the whole area. Our guys want to go out and shoot them up at night. The British are lighting up the area and you can't do anything. And they always had another problem. When you were in the attack, you had to look out if you were on the left side, if the British are on your left. We lost a lot of men because they stopped for tea. We didn't know they stopped for tea. And our rifle companies were still going forward. And the Germans on our flanks, and that's when we lost a lot of men. We got caught in a fire from the flank.
Do you have anything you want to add that hasn't been covered? Any thing that you...
My wife wants to add something.
I want you to tell him the story about the bananas.
Oh, I don't want to tell them that story about the bananas.
Go ahead.
Come
It's
on.
funny.
Okay, we were in Pilsen, I guess it was, Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, and one day I got my 2.5-ton truck and they loaded it with bananas. Wow, what a deal. So I'm driving down the road, and as I come into this little town where we're staying, I quick backed the truck up against the wall, yelled for help. Guys come running, we unloaded a few bananas for our and let me tell you what, to this day, I have a hard time eating bananas. We were all sicker than a dog the next morning. But I was a hero that night. I stopped for those bananas. I don't want to add anything to what we did. No, it was
Wonderful story.
It was a hard time. I'm glad I did it, and I don't know. I think, like I said, I think I'm in favor of a strong military. I think we have to really watch our step right now and be careful.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Great story.
Thank you for your service to your country.
Okay.